There's going to be a monetary event where basically the world panics out of other people's liabilities, and that is currency.
Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. Hey, you know how excited I am when I get the one and only Bill Holter on the line. It's been far too long as we document the collapse. One of our favorite pundits is Bill Holter, and he's back to talk with us right now. Bill, how are you, sir?
Good, Sean. Happy to be here.
Hey, happy to have you, and I want to remind everybody that your site is the joint venture with Jim Sinclair, and that's jsmineset.com. Bill, how have you been? Because, you know, the last time we talked about the mark of the beast, and before that we talked about collapse is here. Bill, where's the collapse? Things seem to have normalized a little bit.
Well, I think that the collapse is actually, it's unfolding before your eyes. We started to unwind in January into a good part of February, and then all of a sudden we get this bounce, and it really looks like things are managed. You know, the bounce began from the G20 summit. There has been speculation that there's a deal done or something done to weaken the dollar and take pressure off the system. I would tell you, if you look and see what's going on in politics today, on both sides, on the Democrat and the Republican side in the U.S., the unrest is telling you that there is a big problem, and it is unwinding.
Yeah, and Bill, you know when I open a call like that, I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek because we are documenting the collapse. We've been documenting the collapse, and if 23% of Americans in the 25 to 54-year-old age group, right, the prime working years of their lives, if 23% of those folks are out of work, that tells you everything you need to know about the health of the economy, or the dishealth of the U.S. economy, doesn't it? Right.
That basically tells you, it pretty much confirms John Williams' numbers of 23% unemployment. He's done work. If unemployment was counted the way it was back in the 70s, that would be our number today, instead of whatever it is now, 4.9 or 4.8% or whatever. I mean, you've got 90 plus million people, quote, no longer looking for jobs. Well, even if they're not looking for jobs, they're unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
There was I would guess you could call it a sad story yesterday. I saw where in Washington, D.C., they're actually paying people $1,000 a month not to kill people.
I'm nodding because I saw that, and it's absolutely astounding, isn't it? It's a little bit like Lord of the Flies out there.
Well, I put it up on our site yesterday with just a one or two liner with the question: first, how can anyone live on $1,000 a month? And secondly, what happens when the money runs out?
Well, you and I both know that the real money ran out a long time ago when the Federal Reserve demonetized our currency. They took silver certificates off the bills and made them Federal Reserve notes. They no longer say gold certificates, they're Federal Reserve notes. And what's a note, Bill? It's debt, right? Which actually brings me to something else I wanted to ask you about. If you were doing your own financial planning with your financial advisor and you sat down with him and you were real proud of what you had and how you'd planned for your future, and you told your financial advisor that the biggest nut on your assets sheet was a debt to your no-good brother who's never going to pay it back. Isn't that a little bit like what's going on with the U.S. government? And 45% of their assets are liabilities in the form of student loans. Almost $1 trillion in student loans, and the U.S. government calls that an asset. Is that an asset?
I wrote about this. I think I called the article "Assets and Liabilities." No, it's obviously not an asset. That's an anvil around the neck of our youth. And that's what the world has come to, is where we consider other people's liabilities our assets. And that's what this is all about. This is all about, will contracts be honored? And the answer is no. The contracts have gotten so big that they can't be honored. And when the contracts fail, what is considered an asset all of a sudden is thin air. It's valueless.
Well, and I want to jump in and say, too, you know, you've got communists out there like Bernie Sanders saying we should just forgive all those debts. So, you know, there's many politicians right now that don't even want those debts to be repaid, even if those students could find the jobs and repay the debts.
Right, but you have to look at the other side of it. A lot of these liabilities are considered assets in pension plans, in you name it, they're considered assets all over the place. So if you default on everything, then you've got the credit side of the balance sheet goes up in smoke.
Hmm.
I mean, you can forgive the debits, you can forgive the debts, but if you do that, then you're you're killing the asset side of the balance sheet because liabilities are considered assets. And
Yeah.
I think that's what the great awakening is going to be, is that people find out that someone else's liability is not really your asset.
Yeah, that's right. And we've talked about that as it relates to derivatives. When the derivatives market completely collapse, the guys that are holding the winning chips won't have winning chips if the guys that are supposed to pay their debts can't pay their debts, right? So then even a win is a loss.
Right, that's you're talking about the derivative chain there. I want to go back to the very first question you asked me, where's the collapse? If you look in the credit markets, you'll see massive tightness. Uh, the credit market is weakening. It's weakening all over the world. Just take Saudi Arabia, for example. Their overnight interest rates since January 1st have doubled from 1% to 2%, yet their money supply is contracting. And that's a function of the oil patch. That's a function of weak oil. It's a function of weak trade. Just look all over the world. Uh, China's exports were down 23%, and their imports were down, I think, 14 or 15% for the first 2 months of the year. That's certainly is a prime example of global GDP not growing. Global GDP is contracting.
Well, yeah, and actually, Bill, we should mention that as we document the collapse. Global trade has collapsed to 10-year lows below 2008. So, I mean, this funny money printing is not working, and I don't think that the central banks are going to be able to restart it. They're not going to be able to respark the global economy just by printing money, but that's the only plan they have.
Well, this was the question going back to 2008, 2009. Could they reflate the system? Well, they got a little bit of a bounce, but it's not self-sustaining. They've had to continually put more and more credit into the system and create more and more currency for the system, but it has not worked. And the real economy, you can see the real economy is declining. And it's just a matter of time until you get that panic moment in markets. And it's my opinion that once these markets truly panic, it's going to be about a 48-hour event.
Well, then let's talk about gold. You guys posted this over at JS Mineset the other day. Guys, if you don't know, the gold weighing in Stan Druckenmiller's portfolio is a warning for us all. And guys, if you don't know, Stanley Druckenmiller is perhaps one of the best hedge fund managers who ever lived, with 30% returns in his portfolio for more than 2 decades. And this man has invested 30% of his assets in gold. What does that tell you, Bill? I think that tells us everything we need to know about gold, doesn't it?
Well, he clearly understands that gold is money, gold is an asset, and he's clearly afraid of something. I mean, for a money manager, for a hedge fund to commit 30% into physical metal, uh, although let me put a caveat on that. Um, as I understand it, he bought GLD, and if
Yeah.
that's the case, I don't think they did all their homework, because I'm not sure that there might not even be 30% of GLD gold in that ETF.
Yeah, he bought the Spider Gold Trust, and one wonders if he couldn't just take delivery of physical given his large position. We know that's possible in some of these ETFs. It's certainly not possible for the little guy, but for the big boys, it is. But let me just read this, Bill. You guys also posted this on your site, and I think it says everything we need to know. Gold is going to a price that will surpass even what Jim Sinclair sees to the upside. This comes from Wolfgang Reck on your site. The price discovery mechanism is trending towards physical. The COMEX is ancient history and does not know it. Let's stop there. What do you make of the COMEX? Is it ancient history?
Um, let's move away from the COMEX and then come back to it.
Okay.
This upcoming month, the ABX, which is a physical exchange in Shanghai, is going to be opening on the 19th. I think it's interesting that just in the last, well, I think it was yesterday actually, and one of the headlines we forgot to talk about was there were 30 more countries that joined the AIIB or announced that they're going to join the AIIB. Um, Also, the CIPS, which is the China Interbank, uh, it's their banking clearing system, has been ramping up, uh, and they have some changes over the next month proposed to make it more international. And it seems to me that these things coming together at the same time is not a coincidence. So I would keep an eye on April 19th. That is when ABX, the physical exchange in China, is supposed to go full blown. And we've talked about this for, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months now, but there is a firm date of April 19th now.
Okay. Well,
So going back to your original, is COMEX irrelevant? COMEX very well could be irrelevant any day that you wake up, uh, based on a big physical trade going through the ABX could clean the market out. And let's go back even one step further to the when we were talking about Stan Druckenmiller. I don't know how big his portfolio is, but 30%, it's got to be in the billions.
hmm
Would he be able to even buy $1 billion worth of gold? That would be call it 1/80th of global production. Would he be able to buy that? Would he be able to source that without having having an ETF act as a pressure release?
Oh, do you know what just occurred to me? I'll have to find the news item that backs this up, but I did once read that hedge fund managers are disallowed from buying physical gold. I think they can only buy paper assets. So I'll have to research that. And
If that's true, Sean, that is your ultimate pressure release valve, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
If you can't buy physical gold and have it delivered, then that tells you you absolutely want it.
right. Yeah, and getting back to this nice little list you guys had here at JS Mineset, what is a contract written in paper worth if they do not function, Bill? I mean, that's at the end of the day the most important question, right? What is a paper contract worth if the contract can't be fulfilled?
Well, the obvious answer is zero. It's not worth anything. And that goes back to what we were talking about before, assets and liabilities. If a liability can't be performed on, it's worth zero, which makes that liability who is or what is someone else's asset, it makes the asset worth zero.
Yep, and then you note the super rich need their own protection and know it. You don't get that kind of money by being stupid, which takes us back to Stanley Druckenmiller's portfolio being a warning for us all. 30% of his assets in gold. You guys note that cash should be for transaction purposes only at this point, whereas gold is for wealth protection.
Yeah, basically, we believe that there's going to be a reset in the system. There's going to be a bank holiday. When that happens, you're going to need to be able to transfer your wealth from the current system to whatever the new system is. And if your wealth is sitting in a bank, or sitting at a broker, or sitting in municipal bonds or whatever, and we go through a bank holiday where things are devalued, revalued, bailed in, whatever term you want to use, your wealth is not going to get from here to there. And especially if there's a revaluation or a new currency introduced. If that were to happen, then your capital is going to be greatly diminished moving into the next system. But if you're moving gold from this system or silver from this system into the next system, you're transferring your wealth in whole.
Bill, we've talked a lot about gold so far in this interview. Let's talk a little bit about silver. Visiting our friend SRS Rocco over here at SRS Rocco Report, he notes that 2015 turned out to be a record year for total U.S. and Indian silver imports. Combined U.S. and Indian silver imports didn't just surpass the previous record set in 2014, they smashed it by 20%.
Well, first off, physical silver it's already broken down. I mean, 1 ounce of silver is 1/80th of 1 ounce of gold. So I believe in a broken down society, silver will actually transact. It'll be transactional. You won't transact in gold because you can't get change. That statistic where the U.S. and India consumed more silver, 20% more silver than last year. I think part of that was skewed because early in the year last year, there were import tariffs, very high import tariffs, to try to slow the import of gold into India. So they switched to silver. Now that still, comparing to the year prior I believe was a record year or the second highest year ever. So the consumption of silver, the consumption of gold, we know just by doing the math, is greater than annual production, annual global production. So it's got to be coming from somewhere. You asked the question, where is the silver coming from? It's been my contention that, and this, I mean, I can't back this up, this is just my theory, is that because China has been a silver nation for 2,000 years, I think the silver that's been hitting the market has been lent into the system by China to keep the system up and running long enough for them to empty out Western vaults with their 50 tons per week of imports of gold. In other words, they're giving up silver to get gold.
Wow.
That's just my opinion.
Let me ask you about John Williams. You know, you mentioned John earlier in the interview as you cited the actual unemployment rate in this country being closer to 21, 22, 23%, as Williams Shadow Stats has noted. And as you know, Bill, John Williams has been saying that we will see hyperinflation of the U.S. dollar. And for a long time, he predicted we would see it rear its ugly head in 2016. Here we sit, and we see a race to the bottom in currencies globally. Is that the only thing that has saved us at this point from hyperinflation? Is this global devaluation of currencies?
Right. It's been a race to the bottom versus all currencies are competing against all currencies. I believe that you're going to see a monetary event in the midst of, if you want to call it panic or whatever, where the realization that what we were talking about before, someone else's liability is not really your asset because you're relying on them to perform for yours to have value. I think you're going to see a mass rush out of currencies and into anything and everything real. And obviously the ultimate real is silver and gold because that's money. That's transportable. You can't transport a piece of real estate or machinery or farmland or whatever. So I think John is going parallel with what we believe. There's going to be a monetary event where basically the world panics out of other people's liabilities, and that is currency. All currency today, U.S. dollars, British pounds, euros, yen, you name it. Each currency is the liability of that nation.
Well, Bill, as you know, I do like to cite the example of what's going on in Venezuela as we talk about hyperinflation because we can see it in real time. You know, Time magazine noted on December 3rd of 2015 why Venezuelans were carrying backpacks of cash, and it's because they were suffering inflation at a rate of more than 150% year over year, the worst in the world. Now flash forward to just a year later on January 22nd, 2016, the IMF was predicting Venezuelan inflation rocketing to 720%. This is the devastating effect of fiat currencies run amok. And what people need to understand is that if they don't protect themselves and take some measure against the inevitable collapse of the U.S. fiat dollar, they will suffer the same fate as Venezuelans.
Right, well, that's an individual example, and that's an example of the people internally, well, and also externally because of trade, but that is an example of people trying to spend their I think it's cruzeros is what they use, to spend their currency as fast as they can because it's losing value. On a macro standpoint, when you're talking about global currencies, I believe it's going to be an event. It's going to be a global event. It's not going to be an individual event. It's not going to go country by country. It may go country by country in milliseconds, but to the naked eye, it's going to look like one big hyperinflationary panic event out of paper.
Yeah, and Bill, I just want to quantify for people what that hyperinflation feels like for people who are in Venezuela, okay? In December of 2014, citizens of Venezuela paid 2,600 bolivars for 1 pound of meat. 1 year later, that same pound of meat cost 14,100 bolivars, a 537% increase. It's devastating. We've seen rioting begin to happen. We've seen stores absolutely pillaged, and we've seen people panic because when you don't have access to food, when your money becomes worthless, people lose their minds.
Right, and that's the same. It's the same result as being bailed in 80%. It's like you lost 80% of your money. You lost 80% of your purchasing power. Now, you mentioned people are rioting in the streets. That's where we're headed. That's where we're headed on a global basis. Even China, with the layoffs that they've been having over the last 2 or 3 months, there's social unrest in China. And just look at what's going on in our election cycle. It's coming to a head. And there, in my opinion, there is going to be mass riots.
All right, Bill, well, before we lose you, I just want to get your opinion on this election cycle, if you don't mind. I don't know where you stand on Trump, and frankly, I don't care where you stand on Trump. But what I am seeing is a uber criminal named Hillary Clinton still get to run for president despite the fact that there are 147 FBI agents on her tail, potentially ready to indict her for her crimes when she was Secretary of State. But we don't ever hear the Mockingbird mainstream media talk about the crimes of Hillary Clinton. All we get 24/7 in this Mockingbird mainstream news cycle is Trump's a bad guy, Trump, 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 anti-Trump, no Trump, anybody but Trump. That's all we hear. Why is this Mockingbird mainstream media and the GOP establishment so blatantly against Trump?
Well, I wrote an article on this a couple weeks ago, and my email box blew up. So maybe your comment section will blow up. I'll try to be a little softer as to what I wrote. Trump is a populist. His message rings true with the average guy. I think he rings true with the average guy on the Republican side and the Democrat side. People know something is wrong. Just the fact that mainstream media, the elitists, don't want Trump. I mean, there's, a Twitter tag, never Trump. Just the fact that they don't want Trump tells me that he's not as bought and paid for as the other candidates. He's not as controllable as Cruz is left on the Republicans and Hillary on the other side. I think Bernie Sanders is not bought and paid for, and that's why you're seeing the average guy begin. He just took 3 states this past weekend. The average person knows there's something really, really wrong. And you've got Trump and you've got Sanders saying he just wants to forgive debts and kumbaya, and you've got Trump railing against the system. But this groundswell for Trump is because things are so bad. People are feeling the pinch so badly that they know we cannot have another 4 years of what we've had for the last 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, and I want to back you up by saying this. What we see the establishment pushing are 2 essentially criminals, right? I've already discussed Hillary Clinton. Now, here's the truth about Ted Cruz. He's married to Heidi Cruz, right? And boy, does she have an interesting past. She sat on the Council of Foreign Relations Task Force for the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, right? So she was for it. Everything that's helped gut this country, Heidi Cruz was for. She's also been noted as being a Bush operative, having rubbed elbows very closely with the Bushes. She was special assistant to Ambassador Robert Zoellick. Do you know who he is? You remember him? Mitt Romney put Zoellick on his team and caught great criticism over it, but we didn't hear about that from Fox News or anyone else. I'm getting some of this from our friends over at Letters from the Gulag, a pretty interesting blog. So I guess my point is that Heidi Cruz is a New World Order establishment puppet, and her husband is running for president, and the establishment loves it. That's what they want. They want us to vote for 2 false puppets. What they wanted to give us was Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton. That didn't work out, so now they want to give us Ted Cruz or Hillary Clinton. And either way, the establishment wins, Bill.
Well, you would have to wonder, they must have a really interesting marriage if he truly believes what he says and she truly believes what she's done.
Well, and that's without
It's two opposite ends of the spectrum.
and that's without us even getting into these sex scandals that he's accused of having at least 5 affairs with different women. So we don't even have to wade into that briar patch without knowing that he's a bad guy. He married a woman who's a Goldman Sachs employee. I think I left that out. She's a director at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I don't think she was a director. I think she was a branch manager, maybe in Houston or something like that. But she was at Goldman Sachs.
Well, let's find out. Let's just Heidi Cruz, Goldman Sachs. Yeah, you appear to be right. Heidi Cruz is an American investment manager at Goldman Sachs. She served in the Bush White House as the economic director for the Western Hemisphere at the National Security Council, as director of the Latin American office at the U.S. Treasury Department, and as special assistant to U.S. Trade Representative Robert Zoellick, and as an economic policy advisor to the 2000 George W. Bush presidential campaign. I'll tell you what, this woman
Sounds like an outsider to me.
Yeah, she's part of the deep state is what she is. She's part of the deep state. And I'll tell you what would happen if Ted Cruz became president. He would probably nominate his wife to be Secretary of State. And that reminds me a little bit of House of Cards. I'll tell you what, this political process we see in this country mirrors House of Cards on Netflix. I mean, it's just as corrupt as the day is long, and people are waking up to it, Bill. They can see it. Even if you don't understand what the Federal Reserve is and you can't speak our language, you know something's rotten in the state of Denmark. And when I say the state of Denmark, I mean Washington, D.C.
And you see that in the polls. I mean, how is it possible that 6-8 months ago or a year ago, Bernie Sanders was not even known, and he's rivaling Hillary.
Yeah.
Donald Trump. When people first heard Trump was going to run, there were snickers everywhere. People were laughing, but they're hitting a nerve. They're creating a groundswell because there's enough angry people.
Well, and it should be noted too, Bill. I know that you know this. Most of the listeners know this, but Bernie Sanders is a hardcore communist, and I'm not saying that with conjecture. He literally used to be part of the Communist Party. I don't know if he still is, but, right? So we see the Communist Manifesto again rolling out, the establishment, the bankers, this Marxist Communist Manifesto. Imagine the choices they're giving us with the Democratic Party. And I know I got to let you go here, Bill, but it really defies belief. Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. Either way, it's a lose-lose for the American people. This is not John F. Kennedy's Democratic Party anymore. This is a hardcore Marxist Communist Party.
I was going to say, Sean, imagine this situation in 1960 when Kennedy was running. Can you imagine someone with the thoughts, beliefs, and says what Bernie Sanders is saying? Can you imagine what would have happened back then? And here it is, fast forward 55 years later. I wrote that article a couple weeks ago, and I got absolutely trolled by people telling me that, Bernie Sanders is brilliant, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's laughable. If you break down what the guy wants to do, it breaks the entire capitalistic system. It breaks all your assets because he wants to make liabilities go away.
Well, it needs to be said here before I let you go that when I did my recent interview with F. William Engdahl, who's a brilliant writer, a brilliant researcher, a brilliant author, we talked about the multiple coups that have been committed against the American people. And we talked really about the Bush crime family going all the way back to Prescott Bush. But as you know, the foundation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 was a coup. The establishment of the IRS was at least a partial fascist coup. We talked about the JFK assassination being an overt coup. And of course, what happened on 9/11 with the 9/11 false flag was really the coup d'etat that has toppled the republic and inserted a deep state that really operates in the wide open with the Department of Homeland Security and the formation of all of these ABC agencies whose job it is to strip us of our liberties. And at the end of the day, that's the hardcore truth, guys. These bankers love Bernie Sanders because he's a communist. These bankers love Hillary Clinton. My God, Goldman Sachs paid her $675,000 for 3 speeches, of which the content is completely private. We don't know what she said or what she promised them. But these bankers have ruled the roost for far too long. And people, we got to stand up because our time is preciously short. Our time is running out to save this republic, and I know a lot of the listeners will say our republic's already gone, Bill. I guess I don't know what else to do. What else can we do? Move? We got to move out of the country, or we got to save this thing, and I don't know how to save it.
Well, Sean, you're right. The republic is gone. It's no longer a republic. And it's my belief that truly the only hope there is a collapse. Because after a collapse, there's got to be something different. And a collapse will take the world reserve currency status away from the U.S. And hopefully whatever replaces it is something real, something fair, something based on the rule of law.
Yeah, that's been the position of my friend Chris Duane for a very long time. Collapse is inevitable, and collapse will hopefully usher in something better. A return to honest money, a return to rule of law. That's what we need, Bill. That's the key. A return to rule of law. That's why Hillary Clinton must be indicted. If this woman is not indicted and she's allowed to run in November and she wins, my God, that is the final nail in a coffin with far too many nails.
You're absolutely right. If the laws that were actually on the books were for everyone, we'd still have a decent country. But they're not for everyone. The laws are for you and me, but for the elites, they're above the law, and that's the problem.
Yeah. It's a big club, and you and I ain't in it.
You're right.
All right, but you can be in the JS Mineset Club, guys. JS Mineset Gold is now live. But what is JS Mineset Gold all about? Tell us a little bit about that.
Jim and I are going to be doing an interview, cross-interview between each other a couple times a month, and we plan to interview, like you do, once a month, and my writings will be part of the premium content. So if you want to read my work, if you want to hear our interviews and an additional interview each month with someone interesting, go to our site, JSMineset.com. Sign up for the premium content, and you'll have my work, our interviews, other interviews, and there are a few other things in the works we're thinking about.
Okay, well, cool. Guys, you can head over to jsmineset.com to learn more about that. Of course, see Jim Sinclair's and Bill Holter's articles, which are posted daily. We do love you guys. We appreciate your support. Bill, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, guys, have a wonderful week ahead. Batten down the hatches, buy some physical gold and silver, and we'll talk to you soon. Much love. Bye-bye.